So guess what? Crown Royal is coming back, ladies and gentlemen. Crown Royal. You know, the drink that Doug Ford dumped down because they moved the glass bottling production to the United States. And in classic Premier Doug Ford fashion, he had a hissy fit live on camera and dumped out Canadian whiskey made in Manitoba. And every ounce of manufacturing is done in Canada, except for the bottling, which then moved to the States because of overtaxation here in the country, which never gets discussed. Doug Ford dumped it out and told people to boycott it. Well, guess what? It looks like it's making its return back to the LCBO shelves after this mayhem. So here's CP24 announcing it says breaking. Crown Royal will remain on LCBO shelves after manufacturer commits to $23 million in Ontario investments. Premier Doug Ford had previously threatened to pull the whiskey from LCBO shelves in retaliation for its decision to shutter a bottling plant in Amherstburg, Ontario, and move some jobs to the United States. Some jobs to the United States. Just saying. But in a news release on Friday afternoon, the Ontario government said that it had reached an agreement with Diageo, the spirits company that produces Crown Royal. It said that under the agreement, Diageo will make $23 million in new investments in Ontario, alongside commitment to explore options to establish a new Ontario canning facility. In exchange, Crown Royal products made by Diageo will continue to be available for purchase through the LCBO. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the company right, but I don't care. I know I'm known for mispronouncing things. By standing firm in our plan to protect Ontario workers, we've secured nearly $23 million in investments that Ontario would not otherwise have seen. Ford said in the release, these investments will help keep Ontario workers on the job, strengthen the provincial supply chains, and support the local community in Amherstburg and the surrounding area. Back in September, Ford dumped an entire bottle of Crown Royal on the ground during a press conference in protest to the decision to shutter its Amherstburg, Ontario plant. He then announced that Ontario would pull Crown Royal from LCBO shelves once the plant closes its doors this month. Ford, however, soon faced criticism from Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, who pointed out that Crown Royal was still distilled in his province and implored him to not shoot ourselves in the foot to punish Diageo. Exactly. This is a Canadian whiskey produced in Canada, produced in Manitoba, because the waters in Manitoba are purposely made to supply this whiskey, to make this whiskey. Why are you going to punish the rest of the country for some jobs that are being displaced to the United States that you could have easily fixed had you done actual policy work? You could have actually reformed the taxes that would have kept these jobs alive. You could have actually done something about inflation. You could have done something, told Mark Carney that the carbon taxes are worthless, which they are. None of that ever got discussed, but no, you did a hissy fit live on camera and dumped out an entire bottle of Canadian whiskey in front of Canadians. I'm asking you to reconsider because this is about sticking together as Team Canada. Kinew sent a statement directed to Ford. Ford, however, pressed on when asked by reporters in January whether he still planned to remove Crown Royal from LCBO shelves. The Premier said, "I can't wait," and then suggested that the company would eventually move all of its production to the United States. So, yeah, Doug Ford really shot himself really hard in the foot with that. He really shot the nation, like he's been doing throughout this entire process. It's amazing he's so anti-American and, Team Canada, but yet he'll swoop by CNN, MSNBC, or now MS Now, and do these lengthy interviews with them talking about how bad Trump is. But never any criticism about him. Never any criticism about Mark Carney. Never any criticism of the fact that because of these policies, because of what Ontario's turned into, because of what Canada's turned into, that we're kind of responsible for a lot of this. We're kind of responsible for it, and we need to look into our country as well as the tariff situation. But of course, they don't do that. They don't do that. It's all a bunch of BS. It's all going to Alabama. Mark my words. It's going to Alabama, he said. The Ontario government says that the agreement announced on Friday came after months of discussion with the company. Under the agreement, the spirits company will now make an $11 million investment in purchasing grain neutral spirits manufactured by Greenfield Global in Johnstown, Ontario. It will also invest $3 million in new ready-to-drink canned beverages that will be delivered to the Canadian market through an Toronto-based co-packer. Other investments include $500,000 to invest Windsor, Essex for economic development with a focus on Amherstburg and the surrounding area, and $500,000 to other community projects to support residents of Amherstburg. $1 million in direct funding to organizations that support the growth and sustainability of Ontario's agriculture sector. $2 million investment in new packaging and pre-mixed beverages through a new co-manufacturing in Scarborough. $5 million in Ontario-based marketing and promotion. So, seems that's pretty good of a deal. Pretty good of a deal. That not only is Crown Royal maintaining on the LCBO shelves that removing a Canadian whiskey while saying you're Team Canada is absolutely ridiculous, but they're now fully pledged on supporting Canadian industry. And that's pretty impressive. That's pretty wonderful that this is happening. So I guess Doug Ford, in the most weird way possible, I guess Doug Ford thought of this as like a tariff measure. Like, this is almost like what Donald Trump was trying to come together. Unfortunately, the tariffs aren't blowing back in Donald Trump's face, and it's not working well for the country. But, you know, Doug Ford doing this boycott of the Canadian whiskey, now the company that makes Crown Royal is doing all these investments into neighboring communities. That's pretty impressive. So I guess there's some brownie points to be made of that. I guess there's some silver lining. You know, this whole thing could have been resolved from the get-go. Again, we should be really looking at our policies and looking at why so many of these companies, so many of these manufacturers are not willing to stay in Canada, that they're willing to look elsewhere, that they're fed up with the carbon taxes, they're fed up with they're fed up with a lot of things that are destroying the province of Ontario and the nation as a whole. They'll have to look into that. But Doug Ford isn't going to do that because, you know, Doug Ford is massively corrupted, much like any other politician. Here, just to remind people, Mark Nixon saying, breaking, Doug Ford tells Ontarians to stock up as he pulls Crown Royal from the LCBO, Canadian whiskey made by Canadian workers. Brilliant strategy, hurt Canadians to send a message to Canadians. Well, this is what he said back in the day.
Next month. In fact, the company's listed it for sale. Are you going to follow through on your threat to remove Crown Royal from the LCBO?
100%. I can't wait.
You will?
Yeah, 100%. But I'm not going to waste another bottle of Crown Royal dumping it. Maybe I'll take the stop route. But what we're looking, and there's quite a few interested parties, I understand, that are going to go in there and hire back all the Diageo workers. And I know a lot of them already found jobs. And I know a lot of them went down to Stellantis to work in their plant because they're hiring. They're starting up that third shift.
Sorry, to be clear, you are going to remove Crown Royal from the LCBO store shelves?
Oh, 100% I am.
When,
what about all the other
100%.
brands that you're talking
No, I'm just going to focus on Crown Royal for now.
You're definitely going to...
I mean, let's not also forget that Doug Ford was the guy that spent $1 billion in his campaign. If all the failings that he's done, he didn't manage one thing. He spent $1 billion to transfer liquor from the LCBOs, from the beer stores, over to private consumers like Loblaws, like corner stores. Not forget that. Not forget they spent so much money on this campaign that we need to bring liquor to the corner store because apparently LCBO is just too much of a hassle. LCBO that's been established for years, that every purchase made through the LCBO, portion of that goes directly back into the communities, just like the Ontario Lottery, just like many other things. That was what made the LCBO, the beer store. They were also regulated to make sure that the alcohols, weren't contaminated or had anything like that. And they were trying to dismantle it. And they're still trying to dismantle it. There's now how many beer stores are closing up? How many LCBOs that are on the verge of cutting back? And that's jobs being cut again. So, Doug Ford is not a man of the people. Doug Ford is not the man of the people. Doug Ford is not a man for Ontario, not even for Ontario businesses. When he says the province is open for business, he means corruption. He means that foreign investment or NGOs or the people talking behind his back saying, hey, we need cheap foreign labor to pour into Ontario to undermine Ontario workers. And now you understand why younger people are so pissed off at Doug Ford, because they got undermined by the fact that Doug Ford is allowing cheap foreign labor to swarm into this country, undermining youth employment. And now youth unemployment in the country, not just Ontario, but the entire country, is skyrocketing. Because this guy sold you out. And that's all this guy does. He continuously sells out the good of the country, the good of the people of Canada, the majority of the people that did not care about sending liquor to convenience stores. They want reliable hospitals. They want proper schools so that their kids get an education. They want proper roadways so that their car doesn't break down every time they hit a speed bump. That's what they want. But Doug Ford doesn't do that. Doug Ford does not do that. And so much so that he's really getting heat from it. He's getting really heated from the people of Ontario that, voted him in thinking that he was going to, be a savior for Ontario, but turns out he wasn't. And we saw that with COVID. I mean, Doug Ford was the guy that told policings across Ontario, hey, you got to crack down on people that are leaving their homes, going out for exercise, walking. We got to have the police officers, wrestling people up that aren't complying with COVID mandates. And guess what? All the policings turned around and said, no, we're not going to comply with that. Every policing across Ontario unilaterally said no against Doug Ford's maniacal mandate against Ontarians. And now with this, so this podcast here can't be censored. I didn't know this was a show until just now, but apparently they had on Doug Ford's daughter, and she was asked to weigh in on this podcast if Doug Ford is governing authentically. Is Doug Ford actually a man of his word? Does he say, when he says that he's, Team Canada and willing to support Ontario workers, is that real? Is he authentic about that? And his own daughter, is saying some conflicting things about Doug Ford, her father, and the way that he governs on this podcast. Take a listen to this. This is pretty interesting.
Your dad said he's going for a fourth term recently. Does that come as a surprise to you and the family?
No.
Hey.
How do you think he's doing as premier, by the way?
I think he's taken a more of a centrist platform, and obviously Ontario is, you couldn't have a die-hard conservative in the province of Ontario.
It's interesting you say, though, that he's kind of moved to the center. I think some people's assessment would be that. Mm-hmm. Is that him?
I don't think that's him. That's my opinion.
Right.
What do you mean?
That's my opinion.
Oh, I don't know.
There's a role, right? There's a role.
So that's his own daughter saying that, yeah, Doug Ford is not really listening to the majority of Ontario, because the majority of Ontario very much on the conservative side of things. You saw in the last election, other than Ottawa and the small strip of the beachfront of Toronto, you know, the condo buildings, the Richie Rich, they all voted blue. All voted for Pierre Poilievre during the last federal election. And they voted for Doug Ford, the progressive conservative. So you can tell the direction of what the province wants. They want more of a conservative voice. Doug Ford is not governing that way. Doug Ford is betraying people, stabbing Ontario in the back to facilitate the higher-ups, to facilitate corruption, because Doug Ford is corrupted. Same with Mark Carney, same with all the politicians. They're all corrupted. And that's Doug Ford's own daughter stating that. She can't really say much because, oh, that's daddy. That's why she, giggled and said, in my opinion. She doesn't want to, staunch down on her own father. I think how awkward that would be. But let's hear that again. That was fascinating.
Your dad said he's going for a fourth term recently. Does that come as a surprise to you and the family?
No.
No, hey.
How do you think he's doing as premier, by the way?
I think he's taken like a more of a centrist platform, and obviously Ontario is, you couldn't have a die-hard conservative in the province of Ontario.
It's interesting you say that he's kind of moved to the center. I think some people's assessment would be that. Mm-hmm. Is that him?
I don't think that's him. That's my opinion.
Right.
What do you mean?
So that's why she said, I don't think so. That's just my opinion. Because obviously she's not gonna rat out her father. She's one of those good girls. She's one of those, good daddy's daughters, I'm not going to rat out my father because, I may need something from him. So I'm just going to keep in my, high hopes. But the rest of Ontario, yeah, they're pissed off at him. Very interesting. Very interesting. And considering the fact that, you just see the erosion that happening to Ontario and happening to a lot of provinces, but obviously we're talking about Doug Ford in particular here in Ontario. It's sad. It's sad. And this is a guy, again, who goes on TV, makes these rants. He goes and makes these, ridiculous charades and has a hissy fit every time that a company is thinking of leaving Ontario and, oh, we got to boycott them. We got to do this. We got to do that. Why are all these companies leaving to our enemies in the United States? Well, one, if they're really the enemies of the United States is really the enemy, why are you still appearing on their talk shows? Why are you still appearing on their newscasts? That doesn't make sense. Also, why are you not doing anything on the policy side that would actually maintain businesses and entrepreneurship and innovation in this province? Why are you not doing anything for that? I thought you were supposed to be we're open for business. I thought that was your whole mantra. I thought that's why people vote for you. No. Turns out that open for business is for corruption, for scandal, for all the things that you've done wrong to this province. And people have spoken. People have speaking up about this. And now your own daughter, who's not going to really hammer hard. She's not going to put her entire foot down. Yeah, she understands. She understands. Province is not the same. And you're obviously not listening to the people. And Doug Ford is betraying a lot of his base. Same way, a lot of these people do. So, but kudos for getting Crown Royal back. It's the silver lining to say about it is, now you can feel good about drinking your whiskey because they are donating some aspects to, Ontario and the general community. But we'll see where that goes because you got to follow the money too. Anytime there's investment like that, you got to follow the money to see if it actually goes into what they say it's going into and not just a shell company or whatever the case may be.